This is MyBlend Stories, and I'm Jeff Gerlach. Ashlie O'Connor is an instructional technology and data coach for the Alpena-Montmorency-Alcona Educational Service District. She also works directly with 3 districts within that ESD, one of them being Alcona Community Schools. She does a lot of things. She's everywhere. Just think of it this way. She runs Northeast Michigan. Done. I first met Ashlie this past summer at the Boyne Tech Conference. We were both presenters and our sessions were back-to-back in the same room. So it was a pretty awesome day of learning. She brings a real practicality to EdTech tool demonstrations. But it goes beyond just herself as an educator. She has a real vision for everyone in that session. And I thought that was just, it's hard to describe, but it's just awesome when you see it. In this podcast, we talked about her efforts to help teachers establish digital communication channels with parents. But we spent most of our time talking about practical student data collection, how to interpret it, and then use it to personalize learning. This is her story.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Where are you? What are you in?
I'm in a sound booth.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So, how's the day going so far?
Day is going well. I spent some time investigating Google Sites today, investigating a little bit of trig, talking about trig, and trying to find some schools with one-to-one initiatives for Chromebooks specifically. So it's been a good day.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And it's pouring down rain here, and it's gross. But other than that,
I had to put away all of our deck furniture at the last minute last night because the wind coming through was so intense.
Sure.
So I don't know if it's windy up there for you.
That's the thing. Not a thing is moving outside. Not one thing.
Really?
And I was on a conference call with Illuminate today as well. And she's from like Flint area. And she's like, 40 mile per hour winds. We're under this watch. And I'm like, really? It's dead out there for us. So, yeah.
Well, cool. So there's a bunch of stuff that I wanted to talk to you about.
Sure.
Since you already brought up that the Google Sites for teachers to create their own site.
Yep.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about how that came to be and kind of the purpose behind that work and what ultimately you want to see.
Yeah, definitely. You want me to start now?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, a couple things about Google Sites is we are a Google App School, much like a lot of Michigan. And we really wanted to use tools that are free for us and are free or provided for our district. So about 2 years ago, my former high school principal mentioned that he would like to kind of get another method of communication for parents to have. And, whether that be about you or about your class or any links, anything like that, he wanted it to happen. And then we started doing this in the high school, and then now we're transitioning into the elementary. Now as an instructional technology coach full-time, I've had some time to think about it. And a couple concepts that I think are very important. One is especially student links to support student learning at home. Sometimes we use all these exciting links in schools and we don't necessarily communicate them to parents or how to get to them. Mm-hmm. The other thing is transparency of what's going on in our classroom or upcoming dates. I'm a young mom. I have a 4-year-old and we just started soccer. And there's a lot going on in soccer. Sometimes I'm running this way. My husband's taking my 1-year-old going this way. Sometimes we need a place for streamlining communication or announcements. And I think that's a good way to do that. But I was actually just discussing with my fellow friend of mine is that I would like to see websites transition into a dynamic learning spot. What I mean by that is basically if we could find a way to take websites and transform them into what is my child learning in that classroom using images and video and captions and presentations. I think that would, especially as like a 32-year-old mom coming up into technology, would benefit me more than necessarily giving me links to things.
my mind instantly jumps to, okay, like you could use a website as a LMS alternative, right?
Right.
So are you envisioning just like having student learning take place on those sites and that is the visibility of student learning? Or do you think that there needs to be a translation medium that goes between actual student learning and the reporting of student learning?
I would, in my mind, necessarily, I would go with option B because again, I have a 4-year-old who's now full-time preschool. She's already telling me, "Hey, mom, I didn't learn anything at school today," and it's just the typical. I would like to play Minecraft. Leave me alone, mom. I've got things to do. So it would be really cool. Her teacher has started using a new app called Blooms to show us pictures of them learning, playing outside. And
Okay.
I just find so much more value out of clicking somewhere and seeing what kind of learning has taken place for my daughter. And I think that also as you and I get older in this transition of technology, we are pretty self-sufficient in figuring out where some forms are located online at a website. I think especially, 30s, 20s, and going as younger, technology demands are going to change. It's kind of the whole method of like email's old, right? And so we've got to figure out different ways of communicating learning to meet these technological demands of younger generation parents.
Younger generation parents, if they're like me, actually prefer everything in one spot kind of thing,
Yes.
being able to absorb everything and if I have any further questions to reach out, but that kind of let me sift through the content. It's like a big reason why I like ordering pizza online versus calling. I want to have control of the situation, kind of understand all there is to understand. I mean, when you talk about pizza, there's not a lot to understand about whether I want pepperonis or not, but the equivalent would be, getting as much information as I can so that I can access that in my own time. And then my questioning is probably a little bit more targeted when I talk with a teacher.
Going even to pizza, like I like seeing what toppings they have and like taking a minute to process that. I want to see if I can have it on half or a quarter, or what kind of inches or sizes do you have in pizza? And it's the same as learning in schools. But I think that you and I are also experiencing a transformation in education where before it was more of like substitution. You can get these forms online, but then now I would argue in 10 to 15 years is what can I do with these forms online to communicate or to go further? So We're just in that rock and a hard place of transformation.
Since you're kind of talking about a SAMR model for life.
Yes.
You've been developing a self-assessment for teachers to take, revolving around their implementation and usage of the SAMR model?
Yeah, well, yes. With the support of MSU and the MAET program, one of my assignments is to create some sort of assessment for a formative assessment for my subject area, which is teachers. And I'm really passionate about the SAMR model just because I think it's the why behind the how and the what. And so I would like to eventually create, and I'm in the process of it, this formative assessment that teachers can use as a discussion point and kind of a roadmap of where I'm going to implement curriculum using that SAMR model and how deep do we want to go. I actually worked on a workshop with preschool RTI specialists, reading RTI specialists, and we introduced the SAMR model, and it was interesting hearing them say, okay, well, we implement this part of reading into the S. Do we need to go on the A level? And it was a very huge debate about what is the proper placement for certain initiatives that they have. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely. So how's that been received? Have you been able to get feedback from teachers on that yet?
No, I have not. But the STARS director, the STARS supervisor, she mentioned that it just really helped providing a why of why are we implementing iPads in RTI, and essentially what is the reasoning behind some of the apps that we're purchasing.
Gotcha.
So that was kind of neat.
So you might have already mentioned it, and I apologize. What does RTI stand for?
You're putting me on. It's intervention. It's an intervention. It's RTI stands.
I don't actually need to know what it stands for. Just the general sense of what it is.
It's an intervention. An intervention model for students. I always say rich text, which is totally not right, but that's my technology side.
Okay.
So
it's an intervention model for...
response to intervention.
Okay.
It's a response to intervention. That's what it's called. Okay. So it's an RTI framework, which means so if a student is in a certain tier 1, 2, or 3, what are we doing in response to that intervention, and how are they responding, essentially?
Gotcha. It's interesting with formative assessments with professionals, formative assessments with teachers. Do you create a lot of those? Do you see a lot of teachers benefiting from having those intentionally built in to some of their PD models? Like I imagine this. I'm fishing because I think that this can't be just an isolated thing.
No, it definitely can. And it's interesting, when I do all-day PDs or 1-hour conference sessions, you think, especially when I do, let's go all-day PDs first, is I create a, pre-assessment, post-assessment. And I think that serves a couple purposes. One, it shows my growth and what they reflected on, what they learned. But I think more importantly, it shows what they feel comfortable with. And so I think natural formative assessment in PDs is common. Anywhere I go to see PD, a lot of people use those surveys. And you're wondering if you could even take that further. Our conference sessions that I do, it's more of like a conversation in sense hey, what did you think? How do you feel? And it's more personal. And you wonder now, because this is my new position as instructional technology coach, if you start working with teacher A in August, how can you assess in a non-threatening manner for 10 months? And
right.
I think those are all 3 huge pieces of formative assessment that are very different.
So this new position, it's new in the sense of how much time is shared between the different functions, right? What's your position title?
I am a instructional technology and data coach for an ESD in 3 school districts now.
Gotcha. So what's the scope of that then? Like how many teachers fall under that umbrella?
Let's see. I would argue 80 teachers, probably 1,200 kids. And then you've got an entire ESD staff. So 50 there, counting school psychologists, teacher consultants.
The amount of people you serve is ridiculous. And then you add in, that's a large geographic span too, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting how it works, because right now I'm a shared position between the ESD and a local and my place of employment. So I'm essentially rented out for 2 days a week to do the ESD side. Recently, our ESD has purchased NWEA and then the Illuminate data warehouse. So I've been focusing balcony view on that. And what do we need to get in there? How does Illuminate function for the entire districts and the ESD? What can it do to meet its needs? Then the other couple days, I go back to my place of employment and I get back into the school building instructional technology coach. So it's kind of flipping your brain left to a balcony view versus on stage.
What should I ask you first about? Should I ask you about the NWEA stuff and what the biggest opportunities and challenges are from there? Or should we talk about what if we're going to talk about that first, then let's make sure that we come back to talking about how you're able, like the digital versus face-to-face communication that you have to use, which with such a large span of folks that are depending on you for support.
Sure. No, that's absolutely fine. No, the NWA, we did our first initial rollout was 2 weeks after school started. The ESD was to support in the testing process any glitches or malfunctions or anything like that. Also, my role at the building level is to kind of make sure students were tested in a logical manner to create a testing schedule. And then also the data rostering was correct. However, and then as you know, first 2 weeks of school, you get lots of new kids. So I had to manually enter some new kids as well to make sure they're appropriate and ready for the first round of testing. Once the testing was done, my job was to communicate with NWEA and discuss with them what reports are the best. And I was going to support districts by the gap of the testing PD from NWA to the reporting PD of NWA. So I met with all superintendents, plus the data teams for each district, and kind of discussed like the 6 most prevalent reports that would matter to teachers, and showed them a couple different things that they could find useful on there in preparation of the report PD.
So you were actually keeping a teacher's eye towards what could be potentially useful for the teachers. And was this with NWEA folks that you were doing that, or was it like after the data came back and was processed and stuff, you were meeting with administrators and things like that and trying to make this classroom applicable?
Yep,
right?
Absolutely. And they and then now the next step is to make sure the testing windows, and I'm going off on a tangent, but I think it's important that you and I talk about it, is testing atmospheres have changed. I was just discussing this with a high school principal, is back when we had MEP, you had classrooms of desks, you had silence with pencils, and everybody had a book, right? So now let's fast forward to NWEA and MSTEP. Now you've got computer labs that may or may not work. You've got cell phones going off in pockets that were forgotten. You've got conversations of teachers, if necessary. And then you've also got some extraneous noise out in the hallway that's completely different because you're testing at different times. So, I would argue that the testing atmosphere is huge. And so I'm working with my place of employment now, my local school, to develop a testing schedule that's conducive and most efficient for students' needs. Because I think it could play a huge deviation in results.
It's staggered lab use, right? I mean, it's limited resources causes the, in the MEP days, like you said, all you needed was a room with desks, paper and pencil materials, and silence. And you had all buildings were equipped with enough rooms to seat students in and enough teachers to proctor the tests. And you could do it all synchronously. So everyone was in testing mindset. You had relative quiet. We'll put that caveat in there. Relative quiet in the halls and less disturbances elsewhere because the entire student body was occupied. Now with limited resources, there's less computers to get students in front of than there are students, right?
Yep, right? Absolutely.
So you have to be, and it's not the end of the world or anything like that. It's just a reality that you have to negotiate. Not everyone in the physical campus is cognizant of the mindset of testers. You don't have a constant testing mindset. You have pockets of testing mindset and pockets of normal activity. Or actually pockets of testing mindset that occur within the body of normal activity surrounding it. So that is an inherent challenge, right? Can you talk at all about the data point, like the points that you thought would be most applicable to teachers?
Sure. Initially, when you first open up a class report for MAP, and what a class or NWA MAP is the reporting. When you open up a MAP report, you get your class breakdown. What it does is they have this thing called a RIT scale. RIT is pretty much a yardstick with numbers. The higher the RIT, the more you know.
Okay.
And then you have expected growth outcomes per age level. Obviously, if you're in elementary school, you grow at a higher rate. Think like a 10-year-old growing versus a 18-year-old growing,
Okay.
And so the brain's more apt to develop in lower grades. However, what Score does, it gives you where the person starts at learning in the fall. It gives you the percentile of where they fall under. And then it breaks down, for instance, the reading category into like informational text, fictional text, and something else that I can't think of right now, but I will. And then it gives you RIT scores embedded with those to compile that holistic score.
Okay.
So initially, when you first glance at it, you can see, and it gives you your Lexile range. which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And so you've got these four major things. You've got your breakdown of categories, you've got your Lexile range, and then you got the percentile. Then it even goes farther where it breaks them down into groups per, like it takes your 8 students who really are not so strong in informational text and puts them in a group for you. So it supports differentiated instruction. Okay, this is where you started. Let's see where you can get to. We test them 3 times a year. We test them in September, end of January, and then May.
Okay.
And then based on those scores, we kind of hope to see, okay, like in the fall, you would like to see where the placement is. And then in this winter, you're like, all right, are these placements work? What do we need to reevaluate here? And then you go right into spring testing, which is kind of like your final exam. You don't talk about it like that, but you say, okay, what can we show here of growth?
So, for example, like Lexile Score, and you said, let's just use that as an example. Or
sure,
teacher gets their map reports, and they basically have a Lexile Score in September, or it probably comes recently. It's probably come, right? They're basically able to identify, and help me out with the Lexile Score again. I know it's related to literacy, but like specifically, what does it measure?
I want to say it's a reading range, but it does not. Again, I'm a math, or I'm a history and PE background, but it's not like you can identify grammar errors, but you can comprehend text.
Okay.
So the Lexile Score basically, how do I say this? Basically, it's not affected by the NWA. It just shows you how well that kid can read.
Right.
So if you've got a kid, like you've got kid A who is just not doing so hot in your class, but he's got this Lexile Score of 1200. He's reading at a senior level as a 4th grader, right? Mm-hmm. So how can you, in my mind, I would use Lexile range as like, this is where my kid is. This is what he's capable of. Let's not push the envelope of a 12th grade reading level and he's at a 4th grade reading level. But what do you do with that 4th grader who is at a 12th grade reading level? You challenge him more. Give him something different. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It might keep his, head in the classroom as opposed to board out the window.
Yeah, and what a powerful thing. And that's actually, thanks for totally helping me to get to where my headspace was at. I'm like, to me, data reports, because in this case it's really boiled down. We know what the report means. We know reading range, understanding of text at this point, which is an important skill that isn't a visible skill all the time, so that it's really valuable knowledge. But then how we interpret what that means is really important. So that example with that kid, if he's a 4th grader reading at a 12th grade level and struggling in school with just my 4 walls, mm-hmm. there's something going on where there's that's causing that disengagement, right?
Yes.
And then I'm really big on teacher as investigator, with informed advanced analytics, like predictive analytics a little bit. Like what can we predict is going on with this student? We can say, hey, this student is bored and needs to be challenged. Could that be a possible thing? Yes, but we have to test that to see that's also a growth statement. Like, what is causing the boredom? Is this child actually bored, first off? If that's our hypothesis, we have to find out if that child is actually bored or if it's something else. Because if it's something else besides reading comprehension, then we have to discover that first. It's dangerous if we go about treating for boredom and get really far down, committed on that path, and that ends up not being the case, right? Data can tell us something, but we have to understand what the scope of that something is.
Exactly.
And then once we get into, let's say we do diagnose it and we find out that this student's just bored. The stuff that he's doing is beneath him, and we need to up the cognitive rigor a little bit,
Absolutely.
something that's going to be more engaging because it's a problem we're solving for this child, right?
Yep.
Then it really gets into, okay, what can we do that is standard aligned, that's going to allow this student to demonstrate his learning. In this case, you made it a gentleman, so we'll stick with his.
Sorry.
No, it's good. So what's gonna what's gonna be appropriate that also is going to measure outcomes, right? And then I imagine you use the January testing really as a formative assessment for everybody, like a formative of like,
Absolutely.
What have we done in the first semester?
Yes. And that's interesting because like you correlate this with report cards. We are semester based, so we've got 2 major grades, but we send out reports every 10 weeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is 10 weeks when all of a sudden you see that D in your of 36 and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? To me, that's too late. These MAP reports are available 24 hours after the kids have taken them. So it's impactful 2 weeks into the year.
Oh, wow.
As a starting point,
I gotcha. So much better than those MEP tests that like were largely forgotten about and really were for state level organizations to decide who was doing well.
Considering
and
we
wasn't.
haven't gotten the results yet. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
December, I think, is when they're coming. So that's a little too late to fix some things that are needed.
And so you're saying there's a bevy of other indicators in there that then are data informed by how the student did that day. Something that is, I mean, I guess it's I hate that students test more than they ever have. But something I've been reading about lately. I was actually reading this this article by Willingham. I'll get the title for you if I.
Please, I'm writing it down right.
Okay, let me get the title. Okay, I'm in the Drive folder. We're doing this course redesign.
Really?
So we're redesigning our first MyBlend PD course, and the original course was a lot of it was a lot of online teaching and learning standards and technology as an environment, like really heavily technology focused. And so a big thing that I've been focused on with me and my team is trying to transition it to, the problem is that all students learn differently. So if we're doing a problem-based learning thing, our course is going to be designed around this fact. So I'm looking for cognitive psychology things that, because they're going to be research-based, that kind of set that tone. So the article that I settled on, because I think that Daniel Willingham is a really like a rare researcher that is also a really practical writer as far as classroom practice goes. So this is a paper called "Ask the Cognitive Scientist What is Developmentally Appropriate Practice," and then I am also going to just hit you with the link to the PDF in our little text chat that we got going on. But anyway, that we know that students learn differently, and we sense that like practically in our practice a lot. The one thing that connects to our conversation is that Willingham says that there's 4 kinds of variability in student learning. The first 2 are very prominent, and we generally accept it not only in theory but in practice, that student variability of their cognitive abilities, that variability is very great
Yes.
between age levels.
Absolutely.
We know that there's a great degree of cognitive variability between an 8-year-old and an 18-year-old.
Yes.
We also generally agree in theory and in practice that there's variability amongst students of the same age.
Yes.
One 8-year-old is going to vary in cognitive ability from another 8-year-old. The other things that we that there's consideration for that we don't always think about is that students vary in cognitive ability from task to task around the same concept. So sometimes one task is there's going to be a lot of struggle for that student, and it's going to appear as learning gaps.
Right.
And it could be contributed to whatever task is around that, whether it's an example or some sort of activity that they're engaging with, and really it's going to be a combination of the things that come in there.
Right. No.
For some reason, there's a disconnect where some other activity that went around it would resonate with them a little bit more. But the last one, and the thing that most relates to testing, is students vary in cognitive ability from day to day, minute to minute.
Very much so. Oh, very much so. Yeah.
And so like when you have a test and you're using that to base your a semester worth of interactions with the student with, it's not a large enough data set. I mean, the variability of tasks might be present,
right?
Because you're having a ton of different questions that you're asking them, but a student on any one of those items could perform drastically different if you had them take it five days in a row.
Oh, absolutely.
And repeat, the same kind of activity over and over. So, I mean, my point is like data and analytics and stuff like that is extremely valuable to teachers because it gives us a perspective of how that student's doing, where that student's at. But they're only the initial they're the magnifier to the vicinity of where the problem is. They don't necessarily uncover the problem themselves.
Right.
And that's why I think the role of the teacher is so valuable. And it is shifting. But the role of the teacher in being the one that won't leave any stone unturned and focusing in on these, okay, well, this is what this data says. Now we've got to ask the right questions with the student and with my colleagues and rely on my experience to really dig down and go to work and try to address it. The thing that data allows us to do, especially when we equip it with digital environments that funnel the task results to us, it's a smaller window to search within. If we're just like, man, Tommy is struggling, that's too large of a frame for us to personalize Tommy's learning at capacity to personalize everyone else's learning too.
No, absolutely. There's no doubt in what you're saying. And it's like, think about this. I personally chose to take math if I could every day, first hour, because I'm a morning person, right? So let's say you need to take it 6 hour because that's when you best are awake. How do you adapt to that? And what's the best way? Because especially with MSTEP, what's the best way to test? And so again, thinking about the different abilities even on day to day, and minute to minute, especially emotions.
Yeah.
Like student breaks up with his significant other or her significant other, or there's something going on at home, or they didn't get to eat, or they pulled an all-nighter. Those can all be test variabilities that could affect your data.
Yeah. And so, we've got to keep that in mind, right? It's totally not saying that the data generated from these tests is not valuable. That would be irresponsible for us to to make a statement like that. Even more than irresponsible, we'd be losing out on an opportunity to understand our students' learning a little bit better. But we've always got to temper it with the fact that the human mind is so amazingly, beautifully complex in the way that we learn things.
Oh, absolutely.
It's great to try to find generalities and find ways for us to Willingham in that piece focuses a lot on Piaget as kind of the example that he sets up to make his arguments later on. And basically, you know, with the cognitive stages of development and the argument that everyone progresses in this nice linear pattern, and there's a person of a certain age is going to demonstrate certain traits, and that you're cognitively incapable of exhibiting certain traits that are meant for someone that's older.
Right.
Because they like, it's lockstep fixed. And the bottom line is, like, when you read a Lexile Score that says that a student is chronologically 4th grade, but understanding text 12th grade, we know that these aren't anomalies. These are just like trying to map a human brain's capacity to learn to this educational structure that's based upon how old you are.
Right.
And
yep.
We work within the system that we work within. We're not trying to change things overnight. We pick our battles. The battle isn't to let all students just like completely let go of age-related grade progression and go to a completely competency model. I mean, down the road, maybe that's something that you're able to get to.
Right.
But the bottom line that we focus on is, like, this is a reality that it's more complex than we always give it credit for. So we always have to temper this lockstep development progression with the unicorn phenomenon, right? Like,
yeah.
We see unicorns every single day.
Yep. Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that, because it's like, okay, so you've got 55 minutes with this kid. And it all boils down to, in my mind, is to work smarter, not harder. And that's where technology and data come in. That 20 years, you can collect this data and it just sits there. But the affordance of having a screener, and it doesn't matter who it is or what it does, but giving that data and actually doing something with data, that's what I feel is such an intricate part of this whole curriculum process. Like, the curriculum's there. The students are there. The teacher is the big part of what molds that into a meaningful piece that we can take back and have student learning happen, right? And so I think that using this data applicable way and use it to sort the students or give them personal learning objectives, which the state of Michigan is going to anyway with SLOs, is something that we need to challenge teachers to do and say, okay, so you've got 8 of these kids who are struggling with informational text, but you have 50 minutes today to figure it out. How can you do that?
How do we begin to, like, that's a great first question, right? Because you know that the response is going to be this.
Yep. What do you, and me, like, okay, so a brain that can figure out to take an orange and put it in a water carafe is going to work not harder. And so common thing is you can't fit that orange in that water carafe. There's no possible way, but you cut it up, you mash it, you reform it. And so what can you do in that 50 minutes to reform, cut up, and engage this what we call this 21st century learner, which has been around for 15 years. Engage this kid who has a 2-minute attention span, and make them learn and sit and focus for more than 10. And I think that's where education's at a transition period. There's more sit and get. There's no more, and you and I both are in common understanding of that. But how do you take that class and reform it? And that's where I think education's asking us to go, not only as a learner, a leader, an educational leader, but I think as a government.
Yeah.
You can't leave a kid behind just because he can't figure out addition. You've got to help him and you've got to help him learn. And that's where it's the most challenging part, because there's almost seems like never enough hours in the day, especially when class sizes are 30,
So, in my own coaching, and I'm sure it's similar with your coaching, we always have the conversation of, what are you trying to have students learn? We tend to get down the rabbit hole, and I know that when I was a teacher, I was obsessed with making lessons that personally were cool to me, and I thought were engaging and would be engaging with some, right? Like using yourself as a benchmark isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's where creativity stems from,
right?
And we like to have creative teachers, but where I've in the past, I ate up copious amounts of time mapping out the perfect lesson, right? And what I've learned is when you think in that UDL mindset of what's the outcome, you can create environments that not only are less time consuming to build, but they're also they're more focused and they're more personalized, because you allow for flexibility in demonstrating mastery of a concept. And then more time, if I'm not spending a ton of time about what I'm going to teach, but more about the problem that as a group we're going to be trying to solve, then it naturally slots me as that coach that can check in. I start thinking about, okay, I'm going to check in with 5 of my students every single day, regardless of their progression through the content. I'm going to set up.
That's a great idea.
I'm going to set up. I'm going to set up a mastery checkpoint where students are going to have automated feedback on how they're doing, but I'm also going to be able to see the residue of how they're doing when they reach certain points. I'm going to have ways of being alerted when students are struggling at certain points. Like, I'm going to collect as much. I'm going to think of learning as a big, huge formative assessment. And everything that I'm having them interact with, I'm going to have them think with and demonstrate their learning in some way.
Yep.
Metacognitive reflections are huge in understanding.
Sure.
If you can institute that early and have students demonstrate, share with you their thinking behind stuff, that's a valuable skill, not only for them in self-reflection, like understanding what they know and what they don't know, but for you to be able to have a conversation with them.
Yep.
So like these things are things that when we're presented this we're presented this data set that we have to work with, because very much as much as useful as NWEA data can be,
Sure.
And everything has its flaws.
Yes.
There's a difference between information that we designed to collect ourselves because we know that it would be valuable to our own relationships with our students, and something that was designed by someone else to collect information.
Right.
Even if it's good, I think I'll speak for me personally, because I don't want to speak for educators as a whole, but sometimes I need to spend a little bit more time with stuff and get a little bit more support on figuring out how this data that was collected by someone else at someone else's insistence is going to be used by me. So I think it always has to fit into those conversations about like, no, you can use this as another indicator, kind of like what you're already doing with all these other things. And if you're not already doing these other things, let's start with that, because maybe the other stuff won't help you out as much. Or maybe it will. Maybe like I said, I'm speaking for myself as an educator, but all of these things have to come together to accomplish one goal, and that's understanding better about how students are doing and inform our decision making on trying to fill those gaps so that they can keep progressing on and meeting meeting mastery on concepts that they need to master.
Yep. No, definitely. Absolutely. And it's, it's interesting that you say how this is filling gaps. And I think it's going to take some time to one, instead look at the data and be like, wow, my kids did really bad, and transition to, okay, this is what I have. What can I do to support?
Right.
And that's going to be a huge, finally effectively using data. And I'm only speaking from personal experience, but I assume it's not uncommon to look at the numbers, and it is not very good at reading. So now because of the student learning, and because of the high stakes testing, because of these evaluation systems that teachers have to go through, the game's changing.
Do you think that and I know you got to go soon, and this might be a question that we just have to flesh out more later, but do you think we'll ever, not will we ever, because we should speak in terms of we can do anything. What would be needed for teachers to think in the just moving that nuclear level, moving that student ahead? Like, this is what they don't know, so this is what I have to try to support them on. So I'm going to try to fill as many gaps as I can during the time I have it, versus this is a condemnation of me as an educator.
I think a couple factors that just instantly popped to my head is, the first one is we have to look at 3 different levels of students. You've got the students as a group, students as a whole, students as a group, and as individual student. I think we have to have the mindset that all students have the ability to learn. And finally, I think that we also have to understand that learning doesn't happen in 1 year. Learning happens over the course of a lifetime. And there are some factors that we cannot change. Like, for instance, the 0 through 5 age factor. That's huge, because again, speaking specifically for my personal family, is my husband's a high school principal, and I'm an instructional technology and data coach. And then my daughter's grandmother is an early childhood specialist for developmental kindergarten. That kid has no shot of not learning, of not being drilled and killed, or of not being this is the writing standard that you need to look at. And so I think it comes down as one is community information. We have to get out to the community and talk about what are some things that we can do to cognitively help those students. And then I also think that, again, we can't point fingers at other grade level teachers. This is a school-wide. And what can we do to fix that and to kind of generate overall and surround support for that kid? So I think I think we should be active in the community. I think that we should, work together for a common point. And I think that we need to realize that no matter what level they're at, there's room for growth.
Absolutely. That's awesome. We'll talk more about this later.
Yeah, sure.
You need to go pick up your daughter.
Sure.
If I'm in Northeast Michigan at all, I'll just shout out your name, and you'll probably be anywhere in that vicinity.
Yes, absolutely.
I want to thank you for the great work you're doing. Your excitement for what you're doing just billows out in the conversation. It's always fun to talk with you.
Thank you.
It's so intense, and I think that's your intensity is your passion, just trying to go as fast as it can through this narrow communication time that we have. And thanks for the great work you do. Thanks for serving so many teachers and doing such great work with them. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. I look forward to maybe doing this again. I hope someday.
That would be cool, wouldn't it?
Pretty much was fulfilling, and I feel like I'm ready to go out and go run 15 miles and just be education. I really appreciate it. And if we're ever in the Lansing area, I will be down there May 6th and January 23rd. It would be really great to catch up and grab something to eat or something.
Yeah, when you come down, just shoot me a message and we'll figure it out.
All right, cool.
All right, have a good one, Ashlie.
Yeah, see you, Jeff. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to MyBlend Stories. For more, visit myblend.org.